and reciprocity, and today's topic is communicating across the political divide. Many of you may rightfully be wondering why we are addressing a topic we have touched on before. Aside from a request in our spring survey, aside from some buffers occasionally feeling uncomfortable about political views expressed during services, aside from midterms coming up next month, the UUA has put together some great material on this very topic to help not only survive another political season, but to also allow communication and cooperation across the political spectrum. There is a reason we dread politics. It seems to bring out the worst in each of us. Every other year, autumn is not just the season of corn mazes, apple picking, pumpkin carving, and hay rides. It's also the season of endless requests for political donations, nasty mudslinging and political ads, and Facebook memes that do nothing but criticize our supposed Facebook friends. Let's start by getting a feel for where each of us is today in terms of partisan division. And by the way, these questions do come from the UUA workshop, Beyond Partisan Division. So if you are comfortable doing so, please raise your hand if you agree with any of the following statements. Talking about politics makes me uneasy. Comfortable. My spouse or significant other belongs to a different political party than I do. I've got a few. I really struggle to talk to people who belong to a different political party. A few more there, me included. If my congregation, this is a really important one, if my congregation became a place where people across the political spectrum were welcome, I would no longer feel welcome. And finally, a question to ask ourselves, no one needs to raise their hand. Would I be more comfortable coming out in a UU congregation as gay, Christian, or Republican? Okay, so now that we've thought about some questions, we're going to start doing something. Hopefully we'll start, if this goes well, we'll keep doing it in services. We are going to ask Beth or whoever is the tech person of the day to do a quick Zoomer greeting so we all know who's up there and we can greet them before we get started.
Hello, Zoomers. Today we have Glenn and Susie Smith, Charles Long, Doug and Joan, June, the Feldmans, Gladys recently joined us, and an unknown Zoom user. Welcome all.
Other announcements that we should be making. If not, let's continue with our chalice lighting. Our chalice lighting words today come from Susie Smith, and Terry Sundstrom is going to light the chalice for us. Well, go ahead, Susie.
As we light this chalice, let us also rekindle the light within us. During this hour, may that light be brightened by the words that inspire us, the music that lifts our spirits, and the loving fellowship that surrounds us.
Amen. Thank you, Susie, and thank you, Terry. And now our opening hymn. Okay, could you put up the strategy and goals? This is my take on what some principles that we could use to help us communicate with people across the aisles from us, and also communicate with those people in our congregation who have different political points of view than most of the people here. Because one thing we want to do, we want to become a fellowship for all people, not just people of a certain political persuasion. So here are my goals, and these are certainly not anything complete. They're just something ideas I had, and they are first to draw the hate and anger out of political and religious disagreements with friends and relatives. How many people who have friends and relatives they disagree with pretty strongly? A few, okay. To help those with whom I am in disagreement feel validated and valued by me, even if I think they are really wrong or badly misinformed. Then I'm going to quote Maya Angelou here. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And my last goal is to continue the lifelong work of creating a firm spiritual ground on which I can take a compassionate stance to work for truth and justice. Then note, my goal is not to change minds. Minds in the presence of love will change themselves. And strategies. Number one, become familiar with my own ego tricks for defending against anxiety by going one up on people and projecting my darkness onto them. Number two, learn to see the sacred in every person, especially those with whom I am in strong disagreement. And three, use active listening techniques to really hear what the other person is saying, their fears, their joys, what keeps them in the game of life, what is their version of reality. Maybe learn a bit of their life story. That's the kind of stuff we'll be covering next week when we get into the actual techniques of communicating with others. Find and articulate the common values that I share or we share. 5, use story and experience. And story and experience are very important to tell your version of reality. And 6, when the discussion is depleted, let it naturally move to topics like how the Bears will one day win the Super Bowl. Yeah, that's not going to happen. This year, are how good the veggie subs taste at Jersey Mike's. Okay, so that's very important part of any conversation. Let the conversation wind down into a more mellow kind of situation. Back when I was a kid, we used to have big conversations which kinds of tractors were better, International Harvester or John Deere. So I would live in a farming community. So anyway, I had a sermon prepared for today, but I had an experience a couple of days ago that provided me with a much better sermon example for this service. Late Friday afternoon, I was driving west on Ireland Road in South Bend. At a stoplight, I pulled up behind a brand new Ford pickup truck that was painted a very appealing shade of yellow. There were 2 large decals on the back window, decals that could be read from very far away. One decal had a word that rhymes with duck, with the letters formed out of AR-15 assault rifles. Under the rhymes with the duck word was written Joe and the Ho. So, and I'm referring, I assume, to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. The other decal was in the shape of a circle, written on the top of the circle was I love 2 things. The bottom of the circle read guns, and a slang expression for a part of the female anatomy. I thought, I have got to talk to this guy. So when he pulled off Ireland Road, okay, I should mention that one of the things my wife and children and now my grandkids find very annoying about me, that when we go out to different places like the grocery store or something, I'll stop and talk to people, and then when they want to keep moving. So I thought I got to talk to this guy. So when he pulled off Island Road into a subdivision, I, on impulse, pulled off behind him. Luckily, he drove only a short distance before pulling into the driveway of a modest 1-story house that was of the kind built shortly after World War II. I stopped alongside his curb and got out of the car. I hailed him and introduced myself to the minister who was on this coming Sunday preaching a sermon on overcoming political division in our country. I said, judging by his decals, that he was feeling the problem of political division himself. He said he was and seemed very happy to talk with me. This is a much abbreviated account of a conversation that took about 15 or 20 minutes. We were standing on his front lawn. I began by thanking him and asking him his occupation. Turns out he is a lineman who makes a good living, but has a somewhat dangerous job. I thanked him for the work he does because I really enjoy having reliable power in my house. During the conversation, I was able to weave in some questions like, do you think the election was stolen? He did. Do you think that immigration is a problem? He does. Should we build a wall on our southern border? Yes, we should. Should we support the Ukrainians against the Russians by giving them longer range weapons that will reach into Russia? He said we should. Did he believe in women's right to choose? In a woman's right to choose? He did, but mostly because his wife strongly held that opinion. Did he think that the current political division and hatred in this country could ever bring another civil war? He did. The conversation remained amiable and good-natured. I felt I had heard his position and a bit of his story. So I ventured that I, too, thought that political division was a big problem in our country, and that unless we started to do something about it, we might wreck our democracy. I told him that I agreed with some of his positions and disagreed with others, but that I thought that the different opinions that people held should be seen as two sides of the same coin, and that we need both liberal and conservative perspectives to keep our country strong. I then told him a story about the masts of the old sailing ships that were often crafted from two separate trees, halved and bound together with iron bands so that they could better withstand the impact of cannonballs. I added, our country is like those old masts. We need to have two strong movements of liberalism and conservatism bound together by the iron bands of love, respect, and brotherhood and sisterhood if we are to have a strong, safe democracy. Diversity of political opinion strengthens our democracy. I continued, the theme of my sermon for this Sunday is learning how to create a culture of respect and love across the lines of deeply held opposing political opinion. I asked him if he thought it was possible to bring the two parties together. He said the liberals did seem to him to be dragging the country backwards, but that we do need to learn ways of working together in a more friendly ways if we want to head off violence and have effective government. The conversation fell into the mundane. I talked with his kids. There were two of his kids joined us out on the lawn about their schooling, and I talked with about my grandkids and their schooling, and I thanked him for his time. We shook hands warmly and parted amiably. Unfortunately, I did not think to invite him to church or ask what church, if any, he attended. Now, that is not the important part of the story. The important part happened when I returned home and found Patty and told Patty about the chat I'd had with the young lineman. She said to me in a rather stern voice, "Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind? I keep telling you that someday you are going to get yourself killed. There was more, but I will spare you." Now, Patty's automatic assumption, what is called projecting or scapegoating, she hasn't read the president, was that because the young man was displaying badges of the political right, that he was a dangerous person just itching to shoot a liberal. My response to Patty was, that young man is just a working Joe with two kids and a wife who is trying to make his way in the world the best he can. Yes, he has fallen under the sway of scapegoat media and his know-nothing beer-drinking buddies, but he is a person who is just like you and me. He wants his kids to grow up in a safe, strong country for which they can be proud. I mildly suggested that she had provided a window into the problem, communicating with people of different opinions. And this is the important part of the story. We on the left are unwilling to bear our own dark and violent natures. We project these things onto the right, claiming that conservatives are troglodytes who want to tear down democracy. Those on the right project their indifference, selfishness, and greed onto the left, claiming that the country is being run by a liberal elite that does not care for anyone but themselves. The result of all this projecting is everybody ends up being otherized and villainized. This makes communication difficult and increases the possibility that there will be actual violence. Yes, there are a few bad apples on both sides who enjoy being malicious, but probably about 99.99% of people on both sides are people like you and me and the young lineman I was speaking with. They just want to get along and live in a safe, peaceful society where they and their kids can have a shot at making a good life for themselves. So the bottom line of my talk today is ground yourself in our inherent worth and dignity of all people principle, our first principle. Pull in your projections, stop scapegoating, and start reclaiming your inner SOB. When you do, you will be a much happier and much less dangerous human being. And you might be able to actually have a pleasant, authentic, affectionate chat with your Uncle John, who has worn the same pair of bell-bottom pants to Thanksgiving dinner for the past 17 years, and believe the current president is the reincarnation of Joe Stalin. So with that, I turn it over to, and I would like to do a meditation after you're done.
Well, now I see why I like Patty so much, because that was my first reaction too, Jim, when you said what you did. But seeing that our theme of this month is courage, that was a very courageous act. And Beth, I appreciate you playing the Johnny Cash song. That was my request. Not only do I love the song, but the fact that it was probably written 50 or 60 years ago and is still applicable today, I think says a lot. The only thing that wasn't probably relevant was the draft. Thank goodness that's gone. All right, so few things get my blood boiling like hearing The 2020 election was rigged. Sleepy Joe Biden is a total disaster. The far left radicals love criminals but hate the police. Or illegal immigration is destroying America. In one fell swoop, you have insulted my intellect, my judgment, and my people. You have misrepresented my viewpoint. You have questioned my basic values. You have put forth a vision of the world that scares me. I've certainly put myself in quite a challenging position. One where a single political statement takes me down a well-worn path that always ends in visions of Armageddon and existential dread. I think to myself, this can only mean one thing. This far-right insanity is going to spread and the world will not be a safe place for me and those I care about. Talk about catastrophic thinking. But if I'm so sure I'm right, then why do I feel threatened? And why do I feel especially threatened when the comment comes from someone I love and admire? Is the real fear that I am wrong? Is the real fear that the beliefs and values on which I built my entire life are not the only valid ones? Is the fear that out of the 7 billion or so people on this planet, that possibly my opinion alone is not the right one in every way? Is it possible that my experiences in this life are not so remarkably representative of the human experience that there is no need for further exploration, no need to hear about others' personal experiences? Or maybe the real fear is that hearing another viewpoint might change my mind, and I then have to question everything I've built my life around. Maybe our fourth principle can give us some guidance here. Reverend Jim mentioned the first. I think the fourth helps us here a bit too. Our fourth principle supports a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Which aspects of ourselves represent our truth? Is it our beliefs about the origins of the universe and the existence of a divine being or beings? Is it our sexuality and gender identity? The type of music we love? You know I like country music. The type of career we pursue, our friends and family, our hobbies, our faith, our goals and dreams for the future, our political beliefs, or do perhaps all of these aspects come together to form our own personal truth and meaning? If we truly believe we are here to support one another's free and responsible search for truth and meaning, if we want the freedom to be vulnerable among friends, if we want others to feel comfortable being vulnerable in our presence, if we want to create a true sanctuary of the Spirit, then we need to allow one another to bring our full selves to this fellowship. We need to allow for a diversity of views. We need to allow others to share their darkest moments, their past mistakes, and their present truths without shame or embarrassment. We cannot deny members of our congregation the right to define themselves in all ways, including political. If you've ever been to relationship counseling, you may have heard that scorn and contempt are deadly to relationships. You cannot be disgusted by someone. You cannot see someone as less than human or less than you and still maintain a loving relationship with them. Here at Buff, here in this UU tradition, respect and compassion are at the core of what we do. Reverend Anya Sandler Michael of the UU Congregation of Sterling puts it this way, and this did come from the UUA workshop. The main point of our free faith enterprise is encouragement of different views and honest and open engagement in a compassionate space. If we sacrifice that and ask people to be hypocrites, to give up a piece of themselves if what they are is different politically from the norm, then we sacrifice everything that makes our congregation sacred ground. We sacrifice our capacity to practice the beloved community, and therefore we sacrifice our capacity to learn how to do it in the world at large. Could we instead see our willingness to be with one another even, and especially when we do not agree, as our most profound blessing? One great insight of many Asian religions is that yin and yang are not enemies, and that the dark and light exist together in the same space. For example, consider these opposing truths. Welfare helps people who have legitimate challenges supporting themselves, and some people commit welfare fraud. MLK Jr. was a great leader and a womanizer. America's America's founding fathers created a more equal form of government and oppressed women and slaves. The Buddha abandoned his family and helped release millions from suffering. Humans are the product of both nature and nurture. Capitalism has fostered innovation and inequality. There are a lot of good causes, and there is not enough time and money to address them all. And yet it is very hard for any human mind to accept that two opposing realities can both be true at the same time. We work to eliminate uncertainty at all costs, even if it means ignoring or severely downplaying one opposing reality in favor of another. In essence, we are clinging to our sense of certainty, to our sense of security, as if learning we are wrong or even that the truth is more complicated than we are willing to admit will be the end of us and the end of the world as we know it. And maybe it will be because, after all, the only world we know is the one we hold in our minds, our stream of consciousness, our unconscious paradigms. But we are assuming that it will be the end and not a rebirth or a fine-tuning of our perspective. We enjoy hearing experts and famous people agreeing with our views and denouncing those with opposing views without realizing that this desire for certainty and approval, this avoidance of fear, makes us vulnerable to biased thinking and manipulation. Rather than strengthening our minds, it weakens them, not to mention how it weakens our relationships and our society. On the other hand, the only real truth, according to the Buddha, is impermanence. When we cling to earthly desires, such as approval from our in-group, political power, and self-righteousness, we are setting ourselves up for suffering. Cravings like these may bring immediate pleasure, but also reinforce our enslavement to a fragile world. Rather than relying on echo chambers and partisan news outlets to shore up our feelings of security, of righteousness, we could choose instead to embrace ambiguity, to recognize that the truth is often contradictory and multifaceted. We could choose to detach from our desire for certainty and to remember that everything changes, even our own politics, or even politics. The Buddha said, "Those attached to perception and views roam the world offending people." More recently, the Vietnamese Buddhist sage Thich Nhat Hanh wrote in his book, Being Peace, humankind suffers very much from attachment to views. It is possible to advocate for what we believe is right without becoming emotionally attached to it, without clinging to it for dear life, and while maintaining great compassion for ourselves and others who are also seeking certainty and also struggling with detachment. We would all do well to remember that many of our most passionately held views come out of our own unique experiences, our own unique biology, and possibly our own deepest fears. And we might choose to remember that other people's political views say more about their fears and anxieties than our own. I might not agree with my friend about taxation or student loan forgiveness, but we could still work together at the soup kitchen. And I can help create a sanctuary at Buff where others feel it's okay to be vulnerable, to admit their struggles with addiction, or to come out as gay, Christian, or even, yes, Republican.
Yeah, thank you, Joanne. That was really good. We do, one of the unusual things about our species is that we create mental models of life, and then we idolatrize them and get in wars over them and fight over them, and it's a major chink in our humanity. So right now, I'd like to take a moment to do a little meditation about just about anything you'd like. Let's just close our eyes, and if you'd like, put your feet flat on the floor and take a deep breath and just breathe for a little while and let come what comes. Amen. Now, Glenn, if you would kindly read our final chalice extinguishing, and Terry, if you'd extinguish.
As we extinguish our chalice, let's each be the little light which, like a candle in a window, help leads others toward their destination.
Amen. Thank you, Glenn.